Margaret Caldwell pressed her sister's crumpled letter against her chest and did not cry. She had already decided long before sunrise, long before her mother's cold voice cut through the hallway, that she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She would go. She would face the scandal. She would carry what her family handed her like a stone around her neck, because that was what the wrong daughter did. She carried things, and nobody ever asked how heavy they were. If this story moves something in you, something you recognize, please subscribe to this channel and follow Margaret's journey all the way to the end. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in June of 1817, and it was not addressed to Lillian. That alone was enough to make everyone in the Caldwell household stop breathing for half a second. In the 4 years since their father Edmund Caldwell had built his trading company into one of the most respected in Virginia, letters of importance had always found their way to the pretty one. Invitations to the Hargrove supper. Personal notes from the Whitmore estate. A ribbon-sealed card from the Ladies' Society of Charlottesville, requesting the pleasure of Miss Lillian Caldwell's company at their summer garden charity. Margaret had received exactly 2 letters of consequence in her 27 years. One from her schoolmistress in Richmond praising her arithmetic. One from a cousin who had confused her with Lillian and apologized 2 paragraphs in. So when the housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a letter sealed in black wax and said, "Miss Margaret, this one is for you," everyone turned to look. And Margaret felt the particular kind of stillness that comes right before something terrible decides to move. She took the letter without a word. She walked to the back of the house. She stood near the window where the morning light came through clean and yellow and honest, and she broke the seal. There was only one line inside. "You are not the one they think is guilty, but you will be the one who pays." She read it 3 times, then she folded it. Then she put it in her apron pocket like it was a grocery list, like it was nothing, like she had not just felt the ground tilt very slightly beneath her feet. She went back to the kitchen and finished pouring the morning coffee. Her mother found her an hour later. Catherine Caldwell was a woman who had learned early in life that beauty was currency, and she had spent every year since investing that currency in Lillian. Margaret had always understood this. She did not resent it. Resenting her mother felt like resenting rain possible, but ultimately exhausting and useless. Margaret. Her mother's voice had that particular flatness it took on when something had gone wrong, and someone needed to be responsible for it. "Come into the parlor. Your father wants to speak with you." "About what?" "Just come." The parlor in summer smelled of dried lavender and furniture polish. Edmund Caldwell was standing near the window, not sitting, which meant this was serious. His business partner, Mr. Norris, was also present, which meant it was more than serious. Margaret stood in this doorway. "Close the door," her father said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. Edmund Caldwell was not a cruel man. Margaret had always believed this. He was a man who made calculations constantly about profit, about reputation, about which investment would yield the steadiest return, and Margaret had simply never factored into those calculations in a meaningful way. Not because he disliked her, because she was quiet and capable and reliable, which meant she required no maintenance. Lillian required maintenance. Lillian required attention and investment and management. And so Lillian received it. "There is a situation," her father said. He did not look at her directly. He looked at a point slightly to the left of her shoulder, the way men looked when they were about to say something they didn't want to see land. "Concerning Lillian." "What kind of situation?" Her father glanced at Norris. Something passed between them. "There is a man," Norris said quietly. "Richard Calloway. You know of him." "I know of him." Everyone in Charlottesville knew of Richard Calloway. He was 40, widowed, extraordinarily wealthy, and considered by the Ladies' Society to be quite the catch, which Margaret had always found interesting, since the 3 men who worked under him at the Calloway Trading House had each left his employ within a year, and none of them would say precisely why. "Calloway has made certain claims," her father said carefully, "about Lillian. About a meeting that took place 3 weeks ago. A private meeting. Margaret was very still. What kind of meeting? The kind her father said, that if it becomes public and it appears it may already be circulating in certain circles, will end her prospects entirely. Margaret looked at her father, then at Norris, then back at her father. Where is Lillian? She is upstairs. She is... He stopped, cleared his throat. She is not well. I would like to speak with her. That is not necessary at the moment. What is necessary? And here, he finally looked at her, finally aimed his gaze directly at her face, and Margaret saw in it the thing she had always known was there, but had hoped never to see so plainly, which was the look of a man choosing his tools. What is necessary is that we manage this carefully. The Whitmore estate is hosting their summer gathering next week. Half of Charlottesville society will be present. If Calloway speaks, Mr. Norris said, we need someone at that gathering who can quietly establish a different version of events. Margaret understood then, completely. In the way that you understand something not because it surprises you, but because some part of you has been waiting for it quietly for years. They needed her to go. They needed her to go and smile and be pleasant and talk to the right people and very gently, very carefully redirect the narrative. They needed her to do what she had always done in this family, which was the work that no one noticed until it wasn't done. You want me to attend the Whitmore gathering, she said. It would be appropriate, her father said. And what exactly am I managing? The rumors, Norris said. And Calloway if he appears. And if I refuse? The silence that followed was not the silence of a man considering her objection. It was the silence of a man who had not considered refusal as a realistic option. Margaret, her mother said from the corner. She had been so quiet, Margaret had nearly forgotten she was there. This is your sister. I know who she is, Mama. Then you know what it would mean for her, for this family. Margaret looked at her mother, at the careful arrangement of her face, at the way she held her hands together in her lap, like she was waiting for Margaret to make the correct calculation. I'll go, Margaret said. No one thanked her. Upstairs, she found Lillian sitting at the edge of her bed, still in her nightgown, staring at the floor. Lillian Caldwell was 23 and genuinely lovely in the way that some people are not constructed, not performed, but simply given. She had their mother's light eyes and their father's easy confidence, and a warmth that drew people toward her the way light drew moths. Margaret had spent years being grateful for her sister's warmth. It made rooms easier to be in. Right now, Lillian looked like a moth that had gotten too close to the flame. Lily! Lillian looked up. Her eyes were swollen. They told you. They told me some of it. Lillian pressed her lips together, looked back at the floor. I didn't. It wasn't he said it was just supper. He said there was a business matter he wanted to discuss with Papa through me. He said it was perfectly respectable. She exhaled slowly. I was stupid. You were trusting. Same thing, apparently. Margaret sat down beside her. Tell me exactly what happened, Lillian told her. It took a few minutes. The story was not in the end as scandalous as Margaret had feared. A private supper at Calloway's townhouse, a conversation that had turned strange and uncomfortable, Lillian leaving before anything truly irreparable occurred. But in the language of Charlottesville society in 1817, the geography of the thing mattered more than its contents. A young unmarried woman at a widower's private residence. That sentence spoken in the right parlors could do considerable damage. He's the one telling people, Lillian said. I don't understand why. Margaret understood. She didn't say so yet. Did he give you anything? Write you any letters? Lillian hesitated. Lily. He wrote me 2 notes, before the supper. They seemed at the time She stood and went to the small chest near her vanity, and withdrew 2 folded papers. I kept them because I didn't know what else to do with them. Margaret read them carefully. The notes were warm, personal. precisely crafted to sound like the beginning of a genuine courtship, flattering, appropriate, designed to make a 23-year-old girl feel chosen. But between the lines, if you read them the way Margaret read things, which was slowly, and without the softening filter of wanting to believe, there was something else. A quality of orchestration, a sense of doors being opened and closed at exactly the right moments. "He planned this," Margaret said quietly. "Planned what?" "I don't know yet." She folded the letters carefully and tucked them into her own pocket next to the black waxed note she had received that morning. "But I am going to find out." The Whitmore estate sat 7 miles outside of Charlottesville on 200 acres of summer green land, and Alexander Whitmore had inherited it at 26 and had managed it with such precise, humorless efficiency for the past 8 years that people had largely stopped trying to socialize him. He was 34 now. He was not unfriendly. He was simply, as his housekeeper, Mrs. Alcott, often said, particular about what deserves his attention. He stood at the edge of the east lawn on the morning the first carriages began to arrive, watching the approach of Charlottesville society with an expression that his longtime estate manager, Thomas, privately described as a man reading a bill of lading. "Mr. Calloway has confirmed his attendance," Thomas said from beside him. "I know. You don't look pleased." "I'm not, but I want to see what he does." Alexander's gaze moved steadily across the arriving guests. "He has been very busy with his stories lately." "The Caldwell girl. The younger one." Alexander paused. "Though I have heard the family intends to send the older one." Thomas glanced at him. "The older one? Margaret." He said the name simply, without additional comment. But Thomas, who had worked for him for 11 years, noticed that he said it at all. "She was at the Richmond Trade Conference last autumn. I watched her navigate 3 separate negotiations for her father while he was occupied elsewhere. She knew what she was doing." Thomas said nothing for a moment. Then, "And what do you expect her to do here?" "I expect," Alexander said slowly, "that she is here because her family has no idea what Calloway is actually doing, and I expect she is going to find out one way or another." He turned from the lawn. "Make sure she is seated where she can see the main room clearly tonight." Thomas blinked. "Sir. She'll want to watch. Let her watch." Margaret arrived at the Whitmore estate in a dress that had been altered twice, once for Lillian's measurements, then back for her own, and wore it with the particular composure of a woman who had decided not to care what anyone thought of her hem. She knew, walking through the front doors of the Whitmore estate that afternoon, that at least a portion of the assembled guests already knew about the Calloway situation. She could feel it in the slight recalibration of gazes as she passed. The way a conversation across the room would pause for half a second when she was spotted. The microscopic social adjustments of people who had heard a story and were now placing her inside it. She kept her chin level and her expression pleasant, and moved through it all like she was walking through weather. The first person who addressed her directly about it was Mrs. Hargrove, who had the social timing of a woman who considered herself a public service. "Miss Caldwell," she said, intercepting Margaret near the refreshment table with a smile that was mostly teeth. "What a surprise to see you this evening. We had heard your sister might be attending." "Lillian sends her warmest regards," Margaret said. "She was unable to make the journey." "Oh, such a pity." Mrs. Hargrove tilted her head. "I do hope she is well. These summer months can be so taxing." "She is perfectly well, thank you." "Of course. Of course." The smile adjusted itself into something that wanted to be concern. "I only ask because, well, there has been some talk about a supper at Calloway's. I'm sure it's nothing. These things are always nothing, but—" "Mrs. Hargrove," Margaret said pleasantly, "I appreciate your concern. I'll be sure to pass it along." She moved on before the woman could decide how to respond. Across the room, she did not notice, because she was not yet looking for him, that Alexander Whitmore had turned from his conversation and was watching her go. She found Richard Calloway at 7:30 near the East Terrace, holding a glass of brandy and wearing the relaxed expression of a man who had already decided how the evening would end. He was good-looking in the way of a man who knew he was good-looking and had long since stopped finding it interesting. Dark hair, expensive coat, an ease of movement that spoke of decades of never being the one who had to wait. He saw her coming. He did not look surprised. He looked, if anything, amused. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "The elder. Mr. Calloway. I had wondered if your family might send a representative." He sipped his brandy. "I did not anticipate they'd send you." "Why not?" He smiled. "You've always struck me as too practical for this kind of theater." "I am practical," Margaret agreed. "Which is why I'd like to speak with you directly rather than navigate whatever theater you've arranged." Calloway's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A slight sharpening the way a man looks when a conversation goes somewhere he didn't expect. "I've arranged nothing," he said. "You've been talking about my sister." "I've answered questions when asked." "You've done considerably more than answer questions." She kept her voice even, level, the voice of someone doing arithmetic. "You wrote her letters, Mr. Calloway. You invited her to a private supper under a reasonable pretense and then made certain the right people knew she had attended. And now you are here at the Whitmore gathering, available and willing to answer questions when asked." She looked at him steadily. "That is not answering questions. That is architecture." Calloway was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "You are more interesting than I gave you credit for." "I'm not interested in your credit." "No." He studied her. "What are you interested in?" "Understanding why," she said. "My sister has nothing you need. My family's trading company is smaller than yours. The scandal damages us without meaningfully benefiting you. Which means this isn't about my sister at all." She paused. "So what is it about?" Calloway said nothing. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the terrace stone, slow, deliberate, unhurried. "Mr. Calloway," said a voice she did not recognize. "I believe supper has been called." She turned. Alexander Whitmore stood 3 feet away. He was taller than she'd expected. She had seen him once at a distance at the Richmond conference with gray eyes and the bearing of a man who owned the land he was standing on and knew it without needing to say so. He looked at her once briefly, with an expression that was not quite recognition and not quite assessment, but something in between. Then he looked at Calloway. And Calloway, she noticed, looked back at him, the way men look at something they have calculated and not yet decided how to handle. "Of course," Calloway said smoothly. "Miss Caldwell, it was a pleasure." He moved past her into the house. Margaret stood on the terrace. Alexander Whitmore had not moved. "He'll circle back to you," he said, not unkindly, simply as a statement of fact. "He doesn't leave conversations unfinished." Margaret looked at him. "You were listening." "I was close enough to hear." He did not apologize for it. "You asked him the right question." "He didn't answer it." "No." He glanced toward the door Calloway had passed through. "He won't, not directly." He looked back at her. "How familiar are you with the Hargrove land dispute of last spring?" She blinked. "Moderately. Calloway was the architect of that too." His voice was very quiet. "Mr. Hargrove lost 14 acres of good farmland and nearly his eldest son's inheritance before anyone understood what had happened. By then, Calloway had already moved on." He paused. "Your sister was not a target, Miss Caldwell. She was a mechanism." Margaret was very still. "A mechanism for what?" Alexander looked at her with those gray eyes, and she had the sudden disorienting sense of being seen, not evaluated, not catalogued, but actually seen in a way she could not immediately name. "That," he said quietly, "is the question worth asking." He inclined his head, moved toward the door, stopped. "Miss Caldwell," he said without turning around, "you should know you are not the only person here tonight who wants to understand what Calloway is building." He glanced back just briefly. "And you are not, despite what your family may believe, the wrong person to figure it out." He went inside. Margaret stood on the terrace in the warm Virginia evening with 2 letters in her pocket and a scandal she hadn't earned and a question she didn't yet have the answer to. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel like the wrong daughter. She felt like the only one paying close enough attention. She did not sleep that night. Not because she was frightened, though she was, in the quiet, honest way of someone who has looked at a problem clearly and understood its full dimensions. She did not sleep because her mind would not stop moving, turning the pieces over the way her father turned coins when he was calculating, examining each edge for what it revealed. Richard Calloway was not a man who acted without purpose. She knew this, the way she knew weather not from study, but from the accumulated observation of years spent watching powerful men move through rooms. He had written Lillian those letters. He had arranged that supper with surgical precision. He had allowed no engineered the correct version of events to reach the correct ears at the correct moment. And then he had appeared at the Whitmore gathering, looking entirely relaxed, which was the posture of a man who was not reacting to consequences, but executing a plan. The question Alexander Whitmore had handed her on the terrace was the same one she had been turning since morning. Lillian was a mechanism, but for what? But for. By the time pale light began coming through the guest room curtains, Margaret had assembled 3 possibilities and discarded 2 of them. What remained was uncomfortable. It suggested that the Caldwell family's trading company, specifically their dock lease agreement with the Harrington Port Authority, which her father had spent 18 months negotiating and which represented the most significant contract of his career, was involved in something she did not yet understand. She got up, washed her face, pinned her hair, put the 2 letters and the black waxed note in her dress pocket, where she could feel them against her ribs like a heartbeat. Then she went downstairs to find out what else this house knew. The Whitmore estate at early morning had a different quality than it did at supper. Quieter, more honest, the way places feel when the performance of the previous evening has dissolved and only the actual structure remains. A few other guests were already moving through the downstairs rooms, early risers taking coffee near the windows. Margaret was crossing the hallway toward the breakfast room when she nearly walked directly into Thomas Alexander Whitmore's estate manager, who was moving in the opposite direction with the focused expression of a man on his way somewhere specific. He stopped, looked at her. "Miss Caldwell." A pause. "Mr. Whitmore asked if you might be available to speak with him this morning, when you were ready." She kept her expression neutral. "Where?" "The study, when you've breakfasted." She had not eaten since the previous afternoon, and her body knew it, but food felt entirely beside the point. "I'm ready now." Thomas looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, and nodded. But Alexander Whitmore's study was a room that told the truth about him in ways his public manner did not. The desk was large and functional, and covered in papers that were organized with obvious system. There were no decorative objects. There were books, many of them, and they had the looked-at quality of books that were actually read rather than displayed. A map of Virginia hung on one wall with several points marked in pencil. He was standing near the window when she entered. He turned, assessed her once with those gray eyes. She was beginning to understand this was simply how he processed information, that his gaze was a working instrument rather than a social one, and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "You didn't sleep," he said. It was not a question. "No." "Neither did I." He sat down. "What did you conclude?" She appreciated this more than she could easily say. No preamble, no performance of social courtesy. Just the direct acknowledgement that they were both working on the same problem. "The dock lease," she said. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, "Tell me your reasoning." She told him. All of it. The letters, the timing, the careful selection of Lillian, rather than anyone else in Charlottesville's social circle. When she finished, he was looking at the map on the wall. "The Harrington Port lease expires in 14 months, he said. "Your father's agreement gives the Caldwell Company preferred renewal rights. Calloway has been attempting to acquire that same berth for his shipping operation for 2 years. He has been blocked at every negotiation by your father's prior claim." Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest. "So, if my father's reputation is damaged enough, he becomes a less favorable partner for the Port Authority to renew with." "Yes." Alexander looked at her directly. "Calloway doesn't need to destroy your family. He only needs to make your father's position unstable enough that the Port Authority considers other options. He paused. Your sister was chosen specifically because an unmarried daughter's scandal reflects most directly on a father's standing in this particular society. He used Lillian to get to my father. He used Lillian to get to your father's contract. He leaned back slightly. Which means this is not finished. The supper and the rumors are only the first layer. If I know Calloway and I have spent 3 years watching him, there is a second move already in progress. Margaret thought of the single line in the black waxed letter. You are not the one they think is guilty, but you will be the one who pays. She took the letter from her pocket and set it on the desk. Alexander picked it up. Read it. His expression did not change, but something around his jaw tightened slightly. When did you receive this? Yesterday morning, before my father spoke to me. Someone sent you this before the family had even discussed sending you here. He set the letter down carefully. Which means someone in Calloway's circle, or close to it, knows his plan and wanted you warned. Or wanted me here, Margaret said. Specifically. He looked at her. If someone knew enough to warn me, she said slowly, they knew enough to stop him through other means. They didn't stop him. They pointed me at him. She paused. Why would someone do that? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Because, he said finally, they needed someone Calloway wouldn't see coming. The implication landed between them, and neither of them looked away from it. By mid-morning, the Whitmore estate had filled with the particular energy of a summer gathering that was trying very hard to appear effortless. Guests drifting between the lawn and the public rooms, conversations overlapping and separating like currents. Margaret moved through it with a purpose she kept carefully invisible, which was something she had practiced for years without knowing she was practicing it. She was looking for the shape of Calloway's network, who he spoke to and for how long. Who sought him out versus who he approached. Which conversations he ended and which he prolonged. What she found over the course of 2 careful hours was that Richard Calloway was not working alone. He had a confederate in the room. She almost missed it. It came as a small thing, a glance exchanged across the width of the parlor between Calloway and a man she recognized as James Norbert, a minor attorney who handled several of the larger estates in the county. The glance lasted less than a second, but it had the quality of a confirmation. The particular silent language of men who have already agreed on something and are checking the progress of its execution. Norbert. She filed the name carefully and kept moving. 30 minutes later, she found out what the confirmation was about. She had stepped into the corridor near the east parlor to collect herself when she heard voices from behind the nearly closed door. 2 women she recognized from the Ladies' Society. Their conversation already midstream and carrying the low, relished tone of people who believed they were speaking privately. And of course the mother is devastated naturally, but what can one expect when a girl is allowed that kind of freedom? I heard it was not the first time, that there were other evenings earlier in the spring. No, truly. Mrs. Norbert told me. Her husband handles the Calloway accounts he apparently... Margaret stopped moving. Said the girl had been meeting with him regularly, which of course makes the supper seem like hardly the beginning. And the older one is here. Did you see her? A pause. Yes, poor thing. The family sent her to manage it clearly. Though I'm not certain what she can manage at this point. There is talk that the Harrington Port Authority has already received a letter, suggesting the Caldwell Company may not be the most stable option for renewal. Margaret pressed her back against the wall of the corridor. Her hands were very still. Her breathing was controlled. A letter. Already sent. To the Port Authority. The second move. Already in motion. She walked. She did not run. She did not alter her pace. She gave nothing to the corridor, or to anyone who might be watching back toward the study. Alexander was no longer in the study. She found him on the east lawn in conversation with an older gentleman she recognized as Judge Albright, one of the most respected men in Charlottesville's legal circle. She waited at a distance that was close enough to be visible, but not close enough to interrupt, which was its own kind of communication. He saw her within 30 seconds. He excused himself from Albright with the fluid efficiency of a man who is practiced at ending conversations without giving offense, and crossed the lawn toward her with the unhurried stride of someone who had already decided the interruption was worth it. "What happened?" he said low when he reached her. She told him, quickly, precisely, without editorial. The glance between Calloway and Norbert, the women's conversation, the letter to the Port Authority. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said nothing for a moment, looking past her left shoulder with the particular quality of attention that she was beginning to recognize as his thinking expression. "How certain are you about Norbert?" he said. The glance was deliberate. He knew Calloway was watching for his signal. "And the letter. If Norbert's wife is telling the ladies' society, then Norbert either told her or allowed her to overhear. Either way, Calloway wanted that information moving through social channels. He wants us to know the letter exists." She paused. "He wants my father to know. He wants my father to feel the ground shifting and make a mistake." Alexander looked at her directly. "Your father," he said carefully. "Does he know you've assembled any of this? He sent me here to smile and redirect gossip." "I see." His jaw tightened slightly again, that same small movement she had noticed earlier. "And what is your assessment of how much time we have before the Port Authority acts on the letter? Days, not weeks." He nodded once, the way a man nods when a calculation has confirmed something he already feared. "I need to contact Judge Albright before he leaves this afternoon," he said. "He has standing with the Port Authority that I don't. If a formal inquiry is opened into Calloway's business practices, even a preliminary one, it puts pressure on the timeline." He looked at her. "I also need the original letters, Lillian's letters from Calloway." "I have them." He blinked, a fractional thing barely visible. "You brought them." "I brought everything." He was quiet for a moment, and she had the strange sense that he was recalibrating something, not his plan, but his assessment of her. As though she kept arriving somewhere earlier than he expected, and he was adjusting the map accordingly. "Give them to me after supper," he said. "Not before. I don't want Calloway to see them change hands and have time to respond." "Understood." He started to turn away, then stopped. "Miss Caldwell." "Yes. You said Calloway wants your father to make a mistake." He looked at her steadily. "Your father is going to make one. Probably today when he arrives." She felt her stomach drop. "My father is coming here." "I received a note this morning. He and Norris are making the drive. They will arrive by late afternoon." He paused. "I believe Calloway arranged for them to be informed. He wants your father on the property, visible, reacting." Margaret thought of her father's face that morning in the parlor, the way he looked when the calculation required him to choose between his children. The way he had looked at her, the particular look of a man selecting a tool. If Calloway got Edmund Caldwell angry and reactive in a room full of Charlottesville society, the damage would be immediate and irreversible. Her father was many things, but he was not composed under pressure, and Calloway would know exactly which words to say to remove whatever composure he arrived with. "I need to speak with him before he encounters Calloway," she said. "Yes." He looked at her. "Can you do that? Prepare him without alarming him to the point of uselessness." The question landed with a particular weight. Not unkind, entirely direct. He was asking whether she could manage her own father, and they both understood what it meant that he was asking, that it was a real question, not a rhetorical one, because the outcome was not guaranteed. "I don't know," she said honestly. He nodded, seemed to respect this. "Then we plan for both outcomes." He lowered his voice. "If your father holds, we have time. If he doesn't, I will need to move with Albright faster than I'd prefer. And you," he looked at her steadily, "you will need to be in the main room when it happens and stay visible, calm, credible." He paused. "Can you do that?" "Yes," she said. That one she was certain of. Her father arrived at 4:30 with Norris beside him in the carriage and the particular compressed energy of a man who has been sitting with his anger for 7 miles. Margaret was waiting at the drive. Edmund Caldwell stepped down from the carriage and looked at his daughter standing alone at the entrance of the Whitmore estate, and for a single unguarded moment, she saw something cross his face that might have been relief. Then it was replaced with the expression she recognized, the calculating one. "How bad is it?" he said without preamble. "Manageable," she said, "if you will listen to me for 10 minutes before you walk through that door." He looked at her. Norris looked at the house. "Edmund," Norris said carefully. 10 minutes, her father said. She walked them to the far side of the drive away from the windows, and she told them precisely as much as they needed to know, and not one syllable more. The dock lease. The Port Authority letter. Calloway's design. She did not tell them about Alexander. Not yet. She did not tell them about the letters she was carrying because if her father knew she had them, he would demand them, and her father with those letters in his hands would make exactly the kind of decision that would hand Calloway his victory before supper. When she finished, her father was very quiet. "He's been planning this for how long?" he said. "Long enough that Lillian was chosen deliberately, which means this was never about Lillian. It was about the lease." He said it flatly, like a man absorbing a blow. "Yes." Norris made a low sound, something between a curse and a breath. "What do you need from us?" her father asked. The question surprised her. Not the words, but the way he asked them. Directly. Without the overlay of calculation she was accustomed to. He sounded for a moment like a man who had run out of options and arrived somewhere simpler. "I need you to be pleasant," she said. "I need you to greet people normally and eat supper, and not go anywhere near Richard Calloway tonight." "And you?" "I'll handle it." Her father looked at her for a long moment. The summer light was slanted and warm, and she could see the age in his face that she didn't usually let herself look at. "You sound very certain," he said. "I am," she said. Though she was not entirely. But certainty, she had learned, was sometimes a thing you performed until it became real. Supper was the most exquisitely uncomfortable meal Margaret had ever participated in while appearing to enjoy herself. Calloway was 3 seats down on the opposite side of the long table, and he was charming genuinely. Effortlessly charming in the way of men who have spent decades learning which version of themselves to deploy in which room. He told a story about a trading journey to Philadelphia that made the table laugh. He asked Mrs. Hargrove's opinion on something local, and listened to her answer with every appearance of real interest. He was warm and present, and gave absolutely nothing away. Margaret watched him the way she had learned to watch things, not staring. Periodic, careful attention, noting the angle of his body when he spoke to the judge on his left. The moment brief, less than a breath, when his gaze moved down the table to where her father sat, and something behind his eyes evaluated what he saw and was satisfied. He thought it was going according to plan. Good. Under the table, she felt the weight of the letters in her pocket. Across the table, 3 seats down and angled such that she could see him without appearing to look, Alexander Whitmore was talking quietly with Judge Albright. Their conversation had the focused, unhurried quality of 2 men who were not discussing the food. Calloway had not yet seen them together, or if he had not yet understood what it meant. Margaret picked up her fork and ate her supper and waited. After dessert was cleared, when the gathering began its natural migration toward the evening parlors and the garden, she smoothed her dress and crossed to where Alexander stood near the doorway. She did not look at him directly. She moved past him the way one moves past someone at a crowded gathering. Close briefly proximate the natural pressure of a room with too many people. She pressed the letters into his hand. He didn't look down, didn't look at her. His fingers closed around the papers with the steadiness of someone who had been waiting for them. "Albright is ready," he said very quietly, not turning his head. "My father is holding." "I know. I watched him." A pause. "You prepared him well." She moved on, found a position near the east parlor door where she had a clear sightline to the main room. Calloway was making his way toward her father, and she thought, not yet. Not tonight. Tonight is only the beginning of what you don't see coming. But even as she thought it, She felt something shift, a small interior thing, not quite fear, and not quite its opposite. The particular feeling of standing at the edge of something large, understanding that the next few hours would change the shape of everything that came after. She kept her face calm. She kept her hands still. And she watched Richard Calloway cross the room toward her father, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who had never once considered that the woman he'd made invisible might be the one who brought the whole structure down. Calloway reached her father before Margaret could do anything about it. She watched it happen from across the room with the particular helplessness of someone who has planned carefully and still finds the world moving faster than the plan. Edmund Caldwell was standing near the fireplace with Norris when Calloway appeared at his elbow, not abruptly, not with any visible intention, but with the smooth inevitability of a man who had choreographed his own entrance. He said something. Her father's shoulders tightened by a fraction. Norris went very still. Margaret was already moving. She crossed the room at a pace that was not quite urgent, nothing that would draw eyes, and arrived at her father's side just in time to hear Calloway say with the warm, regretful tone of a man offering condolences, "Naturally, I bear no ill will toward the family. These things happen. Young women are impulsive. I only hope the situation can be resolved without further—" "Mr. Calloway," Margaret said. Both men turned. Calloway's expression shifted, something behind his eyes recalculated very fast, like a man who has placed a card and found a different card waiting. "Miss Caldwell," he smiled. "We were just speaking of—" "I heard what you were speaking of." She kept her voice pleasant, even. The voice of someone having an entirely normal conversation at a summer gathering. "Papa, Mr. Norris, I believe Judge Albright was asking after you, near the south parlor." Her father looked at her. She held his gaze for exactly 1 second, the particular second that communicated everything necessary without communicating anything Calloway could use, and he understood. She could see it move through him. He gave a short nod. "Calloway," he said, neutral and contained. "If you'll excuse us." He and Norris moved away. Calloway watched them go. Then he looked at Margaret. "That was smoothly done," he said. "No warmth now. Just the observation delivered with the clean precision of a man acknowledging a move in a game." "I learned from watching men like you," she said. "Men like me." He tilted his head slightly. "And what kind of man is that?" "The kind who plans several moves ahead and expects everyone else to be playing a different game." He studied her for a long moment. The room moved around them, laughter from a far corner, the clink of glasses, the specific music of a gathering that did not know it was standing on the edge of something. Calloway seemed entirely unbothered by all of it. "You found the letters useful," he said. She kept her face still. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." He said it without heat, almost gently. "The black wax. I wondered who sent it. I have my suspicions." He paused. "It doesn't change anything, Miss Caldwell. The letter to the Port Authority has already been received. The information your ladies' society friends are circulating has already circulated. Your sister's reputation is already the shape it's going to be." He picked up his glass from the nearby table. "There is nothing in this house tonight that changes what I've built." "Then why are you still talking to me?" she said. He stopped. "If it's finished," she said quietly, "you don't need to be standing here explaining it to me. Men who have won don't explain. They leave." She looked at him steadily. "So either you're not as finished as you believe, or there's something you want from me specifically. Which is it?" Calloway looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression did what she could only describe as settle the performance of relaxed confidence, replaced by something older and more honest. Still controlled, but real. "You're asking me to underestimate you," he said. "And I've already done it once, which was my error." He set his glass down. "Your father's lease isn't the end of this. It's a piece. One piece of something considerably larger." He took a step closer, lowered his voice. "Walk away from this, Miss Caldwell. Take your family home. Let your father negotiate a quiet settlement with the Port Authority. It will cost him something, but he'll keep the business. He paused. If you keep pulling at this, what you find will be worse for your family than losing a dock lease. Margaret did not move, did not step back, did not allow any of the cold that had moved through her chest to reach her face. Is that a warning? She said. Or a threat? It's a fact, he said, delivered as kindly as I know how. He moved past her. She turned and watched him go, and she understood with absolute clarity that he was not bluffing. Whatever she was about to find was worse than what she already knew. She found Alexander in the corridor outside the study, moving with purpose that suggested he had been looking for her. Albright has read the letters, he said, low and immediate. He agrees there's enough in Calloway's wording to suggest coordinated misrepresentation. It may not hold up as a formal legal complaint, but it's enough to open a conversation with the Port Authority that creates delay. He looked at her face and stopped. What happened? She told him, verbatim as precisely as she could reconstruct it. He listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for several seconds. He told you to walk away, he said. Yes. And you're telling me this because you're not going to. I'm telling you this, she said, because whatever is underneath the dock lease he was not performing when he said it was worse. He was being honest with me, which means he's confident enough in what he's built that he could afford to be honest. She looked at Alexander steadily. Which means we don't have as much time as we thought, and we need to know what the larger structure is before he finishes it. Alexander looked at her for a moment with that working gaze, the one that was not social, not performative, but genuinely engaged. Then he turned toward the study door. Come with me, he said. What Alexander spread across his desk in the next 20 minutes remade the shape of everything Margaret thought she understood. He had been gathering documents for 3 years. Not because he had known about Margaret Caldwell or her family, but because Richard Calloway had done to Alexander what he was now doing to Edmund Caldwell, and Alexander had spent the intervening time understanding exactly how. 4 years ago, Calloway had quietly acquired the debt of 3 separate Virginia landowners' men who had borrowed against their properties during a difficult season, and had used the leverage of those debts to redirect a county road commission contract away from Whitmore's construction interests and toward his own. It had cost Alexander $12,000 and 2 years of litigation. He had won back the contract eventually, but only after Calloway had extracted everything useful from the delay. He finds the pressure point, Alexander said, laying papers across the desk as he spoke. Not the obvious one, not money directly or reputation directly. The point where those two things meet, where damaging one damages the other simultaneously. He set down a ledger page. Your father's dock lease is valuable because it gives the Caldwell Company preferred pricing on shipping, which makes them competitive in the Charleston cotton market, which represents roughly a third of your father's annual revenue. He looked at her. If Calloway takes the lease, your father doesn't just lose the dock. He loses the price advantage, which means he loses the Charleston contracts, which means he is looking at a restructuring that could take 3 to 5 years. He paused. At his age, he may not survive it as a functioning business. Margaret absorbed this without speaking. And the larger structure? She said finally. What Calloway said is underneath this. Alexander moved to a different stack of papers. I've been working on this since last night. He set 3 pages in front of her. Calloway has been acquiring Port Authority influence across 4 Virginia counties over the past 6 years. Not ownership influence. Favors debts, relationships with the men who make renewal decisions. If he completes what I believe he's building, he will have effective veto power over who operates at every major dock in this region. He looked at her. Your father is not the target, Margaret. Your father is the last obstacle. She had not noticed him use her first name. She noticed it now after the fact, like a door opening quietly in another room. If my father's lease is revoked, she said slowly, and Calloway's company takes the berth, he controls the most valuable commercial dock in Charlottesville's trading network, and with the relationships he's built at the other 4 ports. Alexander stopped. Every merchant family in this region would be negotiating with Calloway for access to market. He would have leverage over all of them. The room was very quiet. "He's not building a business advantage," Margaret said. "He's building a system." "Yes." "A system where everyone owes him something." "Yes." She looked at the papers on the desk. At 3 years of careful accumulation, documents, ledgers, letters, the painstaking record of a man who had been wronged and had chosen to understand rather than react. She thought of Lillian's face that morning, of her father in the parlor, his voice with that unfamiliar stripped quality, of the black waxed letter that had been designed to bring her specifically to this house, to this desk, to this moment. "Someone wanted me to know this," she said. "Whoever sent me that letter, they wanted me here understanding this." She paused. "Who else knows what you know?" Alexander was quiet. Alexander. She used his name without deciding to. It came out simply, directly, the way things come out when formality has become beside the point. "Who else knows?" He looked at her steadily. "One person, who I believe sent you that letter." "Who?" "Calloway's former clerk. A man named Price. He worked for Calloway for 4 years and left abruptly 8 months ago. He came to me in the spring with partial information, enough to confirm the Port Authority pattern, but not enough to act on." He paused. "I believe Price has been working to expose Calloway for months. I believe he identified you as someone with both access to Calloway's current operation and the capacity to understand what you were looking at." He held her gaze. "I believe he's been watching this family for some time, waiting for Calloway to move on your father's lease. Because when Calloway moved, your family would send someone. He gambled that they'd send me. He gambled that when they sent whoever they sent, that person would be smart enough to follow the thread." He paused. He was right. Margaret sat with this for a moment. The particular weight of being chosen not by her family, not by accident, but by someone who had watched her from a distance and decided she was the one worth betting on. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was something more complicated than that. "Where is Price now?" she said. "I don't know. He contacts me when he chooses to. He's careful." Alexander's expression shifted slightly. "He left me a message 3 days ago saying that Calloway was about to move and that I should watch for a Caldwell at the gathering." 3 days ago? She looked at him. "Before I even knew I was coming." "Yes." She stood up from the chair, moved to the window. The evening had fully arrived outside, the summer dark, soft and warm. The sounds of the gathering filtering through from elsewhere in the house, entirely ordinary, entirely unaware of the architecture being dismantled in this room. "If we go to the Port Authority with what you have," she said, "how long does the process take?" "Months, potentially. Calloway will contest everything. He has lawyers and relationships and the resources to delay indefinitely." He came to stand beside her, not close, but proximate, present. "A formal process is not how we stop this." "Then how?" He was quiet for a moment. "We need to expose it publicly, in a way that moves faster than his lawyers can respond. In a room where the people with the most to lose from his system understand what they're looking at before he can reframe it." He looked at her. "The gathering tomorrow evening is the last large social event of the season. Half of the merchant families in Charlottesville will be present, including most of the men Calloway has targeted or is targeting." He paused. "If someone were to present this information with documentation in that room, the social and commercial pressure would be immediate. Calloway could not contain it." "You're describing a public confrontation," she said. "I'm describing the only timeline that works." She turned to look at him. He was very close, in the way of a room that wasn't large, in the way of two people who had moved toward the same window without deciding to. "And you want me to do it," she said. "I want to do it," he said immediately. "But Calloway knows my history with him. Whatever I present, he will frame as a personal vendetta. The room will divide on whether to believe me." He looked at her steadily. "You, however, are Edmund Caldwell's daughter. You have no prior dispute with Calloway. You have direct family harm, and you—" He stopped for a moment. "You have a quality in a room, Miss Caldwell, that I have watched all evening. People listen to you without knowing they're listening. You present a thing, and it arrives as fact rather than argument. He paused. That is not a common skill. She felt something move through her that she did not immediately have a name for. Not quite pride. Something quieter and more private than pride, the sensation of being accurately described by someone who had been paying attention. "You'll stand with me," she said. It was not quite a question. "Every step," he said, immediately, without qualification. She looked at him for a moment, at the steady gray of his eyes, and the set of his jaw, and the quality of absolute uncalculating certainty in his voice, and she thought, this is what it feels like. Being believed before the proof. "Then we have one night to prepare," she said. "Yes. I'll need everything you have in writing. Every document organized so the pattern is visible in under 10 minutes. I've been organizing it for 3 years. It's ready. And I'll need to speak with Price, if he's reachable." Alexander went to his desk and withdrew a small folded note from beneath the edge of the blotter. Set it on the desk in front of her. She looked at him. "He left instructions," Alexander said simply, "in case it came to this." She picked up the note, unfolded it. It was an address, a lodging house 3 miles from the estate. And below the address in careful handwriting, 2 words. "She's ready." Margaret stared at the 2 words for a long moment. Someone had been watching her for months, had seen something in her that her own family had spent 27 years failing to notice, had built an entire plan around the specific hope that Margaret Caldwell would do what Margaret Caldwell had always done, which was see clearly in the dark when no one was looking. "He's been preparing for me," she said quietly. "Yes." She folded the note, put it in her pocket with the letters and the black wax and the accumulated weight of everything she was carrying. "Then I won't disappoint him," she said. And from somewhere in the house, clear and distant through the walls, she heard laughter. The easy, untroubled laughter of a gathering that did not know what was coming. And she thought of Richard Calloway in that room, certain and relaxed, holding his glass, with the particular comfort of a man who believed the invisible woman had gone home. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Price was a small man with careful eyes, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent years making himself easy to overlook. He opened the door of the lodging house before Margaret had finished knocking, which told her he had been waiting and had been watching the road. Alexander stood slightly behind her, and to the left, present visible, not intervening. And Price looked at him once, then looked at Margaret, and something in his face settled into a kind of relief that had been waiting a long time to arrive. "Miss Caldwell," he said. "Come in." The room was small, and meticulously ordered papers stacked with precision, a single lamp burning clean and steady. The room of a man who had been living carefully for months, keeping everything within reach. She sat across from him. Alexander remained standing near the door. "How long did you work for him?" she said. No preamble. Price did not look like a man who wanted preamble. 4 years and 3 months, he said. "I left when I understood fully what I was part of." He folded his hands on the table. "He told me it was trade consulting. Managing relationships with port authorities, county commissioners. Legitimate work. It took me 2 years to understand that the relationships he was managing were not consensual." "Tell me what you have," he told her. It took 40 minutes. And when it was finished, Margaret sat with the particular interior stillness of someone who has just seen the complete picture after months of examining fragments. Price had documentation of 6 separate instances in which Calloway had used manufactured social pressure, false rumors, orchestrated scandals, carefully placed misinformation to destabilize merchant families before moving on their commercial assets. The Caldwell situation was not improvisation. It was iteration. He had done this before and before and before, and each time he had done it more efficiently because he had learned from the previous execution. Lillian had not been chosen randomly. She had been chosen because her particular combination of beauty, social visibility, and trusting nature made her the most efficient vector for the specific type of reputational damage Calloway needed to create. He had spent 3 months in preliminary research before he ever wrote her the first letter. Margaret thought of her sister sitting on the edge of the bed. I was stupid. And she felt something move through her that was not quite rage. It was too cold for rage, but was in the same family. "Can you testify to this?" she said. "I can present the documents," Price said carefully. "I will not testify in a formal legal proceeding. Calloway has resources I cannot match, and I have a family." He looked at her steadily. "But I can give you everything I have authenticated for use in any other context you choose." "A gathering," she said. "Tomorrow evening. Will you be present?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'll be present, outside. If you need me to confirm something in person, send word and I'll come in." He paused. "But Miss Caldwell, you need to understand something about tomorrow night. Calloway will not be passive when you begin. He will respond, and he will respond fast, and he will try to reframe everything you present as a personal attack from a grieving family." He looked at her. "You have to be further ahead than he is, always. The moment he controls the narrative in that room, you lose." "I know," she said. "Do you?" He was not unkind. "I have watched him do this 6 times. The families who lost, they were all convinced they understood the situation. They all thought preparation was enough." He held her gaze. "He's very good at reading a room. He knows which person is most likely to crack under pressure, and he applies pressure there first. He'll look for your weakest point, and he'll use it." "What does he think my weakest point is?" she said. Price looked at her for a moment. "Your father." She had known it before he said it. That didn't make it easier to hear. "Then my father stays out of the main room until it's done," she said. She stood, gathered the documents Price laid in front of her, organized, annotated, exactly as careful as the room they were sitting in. She put them with everything else she was carrying. She had not had a free hand in 2 days. She was beginning to understand this was simply how it was going to be until it was over. At the door she stopped and turned back. "Mr. Price," she said. "Why me? You watched my family for months. Why not go directly to Alexander? He had resources, legal standing." "Because Calloway expected Alexander," Price said simply. "He has a counter prepared for everything Alexander could do. He has been preparing it for 3 years. He paused. "He had no counter prepared for you, because he never imagined you were coming." She nodded once, went out into the summer dark. Alexander fell into step beside her on the road back. He did not speak immediately. They walked in the particular shared silence of 2 people who have been in the same difficult room and don't need to process it aloud. After a while, he said quietly, "Your father." "I'll handle it," she said. "Margaret." He stopped walking. She stopped too, turned to look at him. The summer night was warm and full of crickets, and the road was empty in both directions. "If Calloway moves on your father before you're ready tomorrow, if he approaches him privately and says something that provokes a response, I know the risk. I want to be certain you know it completely." He looked at her with the steadiness that she had come to understand was not coldness, but its opposite, the kind of absolute undecorated attention that most people never offered because it cost too much to maintain. "I can have Thomas stay near your father all evening, not intrusively, just present, as a deterrent." She thought about this, about her father's pride, which was considerable, about whether he would accept the help if he understood what it was. "Don't tell him why," she said. "Just tell Thomas to keep him company." "Done." He paused. "And your sister? Lillian doesn't know what's happening tomorrow." "Do you want her to?" Margaret considered it. Thought of Lillian's face, swollen and exhausted. Thought of the particular burden of knowing a fight is being fought on your behalf and being able to do nothing. "No," she said. "She's carried enough of this already." They walked the rest of the way back in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than the one they had shared, walking out warmer somehow. More settled. The silence of 2 people who have agreed on something important without needing to name it. Chapter. She did not sleep that night either. But this time, it was not anxiety keeping her awake, it was work. She sat at the small writing desk in the guest room until the lamp burned low, organizing Price's documents alongside Alexander's building. The sequence of presentation, the way her father had taught her to organize a trade negotiation. Anticipate every objection, address it before it's raised. Give the other side nowhere to stand. By 3 in the morning, she had a structure she believed in. By 4, she had memorized it. By 5, she had found the 2 places where it was still fragile and decided how to hold them. She put the papers in order, blew out the lamp, lay down on top of the covers in her dress, and let her body rest even though her mind did not entirely stop. She thought about what Price had said. He never imagined you were coming. She had spent 27 years being the one no one imagined was coming. Arriving places after the important decisions were made. Being handed the consequences of other people's choices and expected to manage them without complaint. Being the reliable one, the capable one, the one who did not require maintenance. She had never thought of it as an advantage before. She thought about it now. The final evening of the Whitmore summer gathering had a particular intensity. The specific energy of an event that everyone knows is ending and therefore tries harder than usual to make feel significant. The main room was full. Every merchant family of consequence in Charlottesville was represented. The Ladies' Society was present in force. Judge Albright was near the far wall with 2 men Margaret recognized as Port Authority commissioners, which meant Alexander had arranged more than he had told her. Good. Calloway arrived 20 minutes after the gathering began. He was impeccably dressed and unhurried and moved through the room with the settled ease of a man for whom this was not a battlefield, but a stage he had performed on many times. He found her with his eyes within 2 minutes of entering. She was standing near the center of the room, not hidden, not peripheral, but visible, talking with Mrs. Albright about summer gardens. She did not look at him when he looked at her. She smiled at something Mrs. Albright said, and touched her arm lightly, and laughed with the easy warmth of a woman having a genuinely pleasant conversation. She felt him recalibrating. She felt it from across the room. Good. Her father was near the north wall with Thomas holding a glass of something and looking considerably more composed than she had feared, which meant the night had treated him gently so far, or Thomas was very good at his job. Probably both. Alexander was near the fireplace. He caught her eye once briefly, a glance that lasted less than a second, and said, "Ready when you are." She gave him nothing back, nothing that could be read. Just continued her conversation with Mrs. Albright for another full minute, finished it gracefully, and then moved toward the center of the room with the papers under her arm and the particular interior gathering of a woman who has decided that this is the moment. She did not give herself time to reconsider. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, clearly. Not loudly, she did not need to be loud. She had learned long ago that a clear voice in a quiet moment carries further than a shout. The room turned toward her with the natural attention that people give to the unexpected. "I apologize for the interruption to the evening. I will be brief, and then you can return to your conversations with, I hope, more useful information than you had before." She felt the room still, felt Calloway from somewhere behind her left shoulder go very quiet. "My name is Margaret Caldwell. My family's company holds the Harrington dock lease, which most of you know. What many of you do not know is that over the past 6 years, a systematic effort has been made to manipulate the commercial standing of merchant families in this region, not through competition, which is legitimate, but through manufactured scandal, coordinated misinformation, and deliberate social engineering." She paused. One breath. "I have documentation." The room was completely silent. She set the first paper on the table beside her. "This is a letter from Richard Calloway to Miss Lillian Caldwell, dated April 3rd of this year. I will not read it in full. My sister's privacy is not forfeit because she was targeted, but I will read you this passage." She read it. The relevant lines, the specific phrasing that to a careful ear revealed the orchestration beneath the warmth. Several people in the room frowned. One woman near the back made a small sharp sound. This is the original record of a payment made in March of this year to a courier service whose function, as documented here, was the delivery of specific information to specific individuals at specific social gatherings. She set it down. This is correspondence between Mr. James Norbert and Calloway's office regarding the timing of a communication to the Harrington Port Authority. She set it down. And these, she laid out 4 more documents carefully, one at a time, each with a word of context, are records of 5 previous instances in which families in this region experienced similar patterns of targeted reputational damage followed by loss of commercial position. The Greer family, the Maddox Company, the Hargrove land, the Pemberton shipping contract. She looked up at the room. And your family, Mr. Sutherland. She looked directly at a man near the left side of the room, heavy-set gray-haired, who had gone very still at the mention of the Pemberton contract. I believe you thought that was a coincidence. It was not. Sutherland's face was the color of old brick. That was when Calloway moved. She heard him before she saw him, the shift in the room's attention, the parting of people as he came through the absolute controlled pace of a man who was not panicking but was absolutely responding. Miss Caldwell? His voice was everything it needed to be concerned, measured, carrying the tone of a man addressing someone in clear distress. I think we should allow this room to enjoy its evening, rather than... Mr. Calloway? She turned to face him. She had been waiting for this. She had built the whole structure for this exact moment. Thank you for joining us. I was about to show the room a document that concerns you directly. She held it up. Did not hand it to him. Held it where the room could see it was real. This is an internal memorandum from your company's office dated February of this year, outlining the projected timeline for the acquisition of the Harrington Dock lease, following what it describes as, and I'm quoting directly, the neutralization of the Caldwell family's commercial credibility through standard social procedure. She let that land. Let the room hold it. Standard social procedure, Mr. Calloway. That is how my sister is described in your own records, as procedure. The room's temperature changed. She could feel it not metaphorically but physically, the particular quality of a crowd whose orientation has shifted. Calloway did not flinch. She had expected that. He was too good to flinch. This is a grieving family, making accusations under emotional distress, he said to the room, calm and compassionate. Miss Caldwell has endured a difficult... Judge Albright, Margaret said without raising her voice. Albright moved forward from the far wall. Behind him, the 2 Port Authority commissioners moved with him. Calloway saw them. For the first time, something behind his eyes registered something other than control. The Port Authority has been presented with a formal request for review of all lease renewal decisions in this county for the past 6 years. Albright said in the dry, unhurried voice of a man whose authority is so established he has never needed to assert it loudly. Based on preliminary documentation reviewed this afternoon, that request has been accepted. The room erupted. Not loudly. This was not a crowd that expressed itself loudly. But the movement was immediate and total, people turning to each other, voices overlapping in urgent undertones. The Sutherland man taking a step forward, another merchant family representative pulling a companion by the sleeve and speaking rapidly in his ear. Calloway looked at Margaret, and for one moment, one single compressed moment, his mask was gone. Not replaced by rage or panic, but by something she hadn't expected. Something that looked almost like recognition. The expression of a man who has spent years believing he is the only person in the room who is paying full attention and has just discovered he was wrong. You had help, he said, very quietly, for her ears only. I had information, she said, and the sense to understand it. Price? She said nothing. His jaw tightened. He'll regret, Mr. Calloway. Her voice was quiet and entirely level. Look at this room. He looked. She watched him look, watched him read the faces, read the postures, read the irreversible momentum of a social reality that had shifted and was not shifting back. The Sutherland man was now speaking directly to one of the Port Authority commissioners. 3 other merchantmen had gathered around the documents she had laid on the table and were examining them with the focused attention of people who recognize their own names in someone else's story. Mrs. Hargrove, who had spent 2 days circulating Calloway's narrative, was standing very still with the expression of a woman recalculating an investment. It was done. Not legally, that would take months, and Calloway would fight every step of it, and it would be expensive and exhausting and uncertain. But in this room tonight, the architecture he had built was broken. The relationships he had cultivated, the careful positioning, the years of constructed trust, all of it had been turned in a single evening and laid out for this room to examine. He looked back at her. "This is not finished," he said. "No," she agreed. "But you are. Here. In this room. With these people." She held his gaze. "Which is where it mattered." He left. Not dramatically, that would have been beneath him, and whatever else Richard Calloway was, he was not a man who made unnecessary scenes. He simply gradually, over the next 20 minutes, removed himself from the gathering with the smooth inevitability of a tide going out. His absence was noticed. It was remarked upon. It was interpreted correctly by every person in the room who had been watching. Margaret stood near the table with the documents and answered questions steadily for the next half hour. Some were from the merchant families with obvious personal stakes. Some were from the Ladies' Society members, with the specific curiosity of people who have realized they have been used as instruments and are processing their anger about it. She answered all of them, clearly, precisely, without embellishment. At some point she could not have said exactly when her father appeared beside her. He stood there for a moment without speaking, looking at the table, at the documents, at the faces of the people around her. Then he looked at her. She had expected many things from him. Gratitude. Formality. The reflex of a man reclaiming authority over a situation his daughter had managed. She had been prepared for all of these. He put his hand on her arm. It was a small gesture, brief and simple. The hand of a man who did not have words and knew it and was offering what he had instead. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You should have been doing this for years," he said quietly. "Running the negotiations, managing the relationships." He stopped, looked away. "I was wrong about what you needed." She understood he meant I was wrong about what you were. She did not say yes you were, not because it wasn't true, but because the moment was already doing enough without her adding to it. "We'll talk," she said. "Later." He nodded, released her arm, moved back toward Thomas. She turned. Alexander was standing 5 feet away, and he had clearly heard all of it. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not assessment, not the working focus of a man solving a problem, but something quieter and more unguarded than that. "Well done," he said. And the 2 words from him in that voice carried the weight of everything he did not add. "We did it together," she said. "No." He shook his head slightly. "You did the part that mattered. I organized papers. You stood in front of a room and made people see clearly." He paused. "That's not the same thing." She looked at him for a moment, at the steady certainty in his face, at the quality of a man who is not offering a compliment, but a fact. "Lillian will be all right," she said, because that was still the question underneath everything, the question she had been carrying since the beginning. "The social pressure on your sister came entirely from Calloway's engineered narrative," he said. "That narrative has been publicly dismantled tonight. The women who were circulating it—" He glanced briefly toward Mrs. Hargrove. "Will reverse course before tomorrow morning, because that is what they do, and this time, it will work in Lillian's favor." He paused. "She will be all right." Margaret exhaled. A long, quiet breath that released something she had been holding for 3 days without fully knowing she was holding it. "Then it's done," she said. "The hard part is done," he said. And the way he said it, the slight emphasis on hard, made her look at him more carefully. He was looking at her with that unguarded expression still on his face, and she realized with the particular clarity of a woman who has been paying attention to everything else and has only just turned the full force of her attention here that he was nervous. Alexander Whitmore, who had faced Calloway's engineering without visible agitation, who had managed a gathering full of volatile social dynamics with the steady efficiency of long practice, was standing 5 feet away from her and was undeniably nervous. It was the most human she had seen him look. "There is something I want to say to you," he said, "and I am trying to determine the right moment." "This seems like the moment," she said. He looked at her. Looked at the room around them, still busy, still full. Still the particular aftermath energy of something significant. "Not here," he said. "Not in front of all of this." She looked at him steadily. Felt something warm and careful moving in her chest. Something she had been aware of for 2 days, and had been sensibly ignoring in favor of the urgent business of preventing her family's ruin. "Then find me after," she said. "I will," he said, immediately. With the same certainty he had applied to everything else. She turned back to the room. To the remaining questions, the documents, the aftermath that still needed managing. She turned back to the work, which was what she had always done. But the warmth in her chest did not go anywhere. It stayed steady and present the way something stays when it has decided it belongs. The room took a long time to empty. That was the nature of evenings like this one. Evenings where something real had happened, where the air had changed, and people needed time to stand inside the new shape of things before they could bring themselves to leave it. The merchantmen clustered around the documents for another hour. The Port Authority commissioners spoke at length with Judge Albright in a corner with the focused intensity of people revising a timeline. Mrs. Hargrove left early, which everyone noticed, and no one mentioned, which was its own kind of verdict. Margaret answered. The last question shook the last hand and stood alone at the table for a moment with the documents in front of her. Price's careful years of work. Alexander's 3 years of accumulation. Her own 3 days of assembly. And felt the particular exhaustion that arrives not during the hard thing, but precisely after it, when the body realizes it has been holding itself at a pitch it cannot sustain and finally begins to release. Her father found her before she could move. He did not come with Norris this time. He came alone, which was itself significant. Edmund Caldwell rarely went anywhere significant without Norris at his elbow, because Norris was the person he trusted to catch what he missed. Coming alone meant he intended to say something he hadn't calculated. "I need to ask you something," he said. "All right. How long have you known how to do this?" He gestured at the table at the room at the whole evening. "Not tonight. I mean the trade conference in Richmond. I heard from 2 different men that you negotiated the Baxter freight agreement while I was in the other meeting. I told myself it was an exaggeration." "It wasn't an exaggeration," she said. He was quiet. "Papa." She turned to face him fully. "I have been doing this work for 6 years. Quietly. In rooms where you were occupied elsewhere. Because it needed doing, and I could do it, and no one asked me to stop." She held his gaze. "I didn't do it to prove something. I did it because the company needed it done." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched him. This man she had spent her whole life trying to matter to go through something complicated and private the way men go through things, when they realize they've been wrong in a way that has costs they cannot retroactively pay. "I owe you an accounting," he said finally. "You owe Lillian an accounting," she said. "She is the one who paid the most for this. She was chosen because she was trusting and because she loved this family enough to help when she thought she was being asked to." She paused. "Whatever you owe me can wait. She needs it first." Her father nodded, slowly. The nod of a man accepting a correction he deserved. "You're right," he said. Just that. Simply and directly, without the surrounding architecture of justification that men usually build around admissions like this one. She had waited 27 years to hear her father say those 2 words to her about something that mattered. They arrived smaller and quieter than she had imagined, and somehow more real for it. She found Lillian in the upstairs sitting room, where a maid had evidently taken her some tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Lillian was sitting very straight in the chair, the way she sat when she was trying to hold herself together through posture alone. and she looked up when Margaret came in, with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting and is not sure whether the news arriving is survivable. "Is it done?" Lillian said. "It's done." Lillian closed her eyes. 1 breath. 2. Then she opened them. "Tell me," she said. Margaret sat across from her and told her. All of it, not the version she had given the gathering, compressed and documented and presented for maximum clarity, but the real version, the human version. Calloway's selection of her deliberate and calculated. The letters and what they revealed. The larger system he had been building and what she had been made into without her knowledge. Lillian listened without interrupting. Her face went through several things. When Margaret reached the part about the internal memorandum standard social procedure, Lillian's jaw tightened, and something moved through her eyes that was not grief but its harder cousin. "He chose me because I was easy," she said flatly. "He chose you because you were trusting," Margaret said. "Those are not the same thing. They felt the same in that room tonight while I was sitting here not knowing." Lillian stopped, pressed her lips together. "I should have been there." "No, you shouldn't have. You had already carried the hardest part of this." "You carried it," Lillian said. "You carried all of it. You always carry all of it, and nobody ever—" She stopped again. Her voice had gone unsteady in a way she was visibly trying to manage. "Margaret, I have let this family treat you like furniture for years. I have benefited from it. I smiled and went to the gatherings and received the letters and had the dresses fitted, and never once asked what you were doing in the other rooms while all of that was happening." She looked at her directly. "I am sorry. I know that's not enough." Margaret looked at her sister, this woman who had always been the one people looked at, who had moved through their shared childhood as the point of the arrow, while Margaret was the shaft necessary and unnoticed, and felt something that was too layered to name. It contained love. It contained the particular grief of years that cannot be reclaimed. It contained unexpectedly forgiveness, which had arrived before she had consciously decided to give it. "It's enough to start," she said. Lillian reached across and took her hand, held it. The way sisters hold hands when words have run out and something truer than words is needed. They sat like that for a while. She found Alexander on the East Terrace. He was standing where he had been standing 2 nights ago when he had first spoken to her, the same terrace, the same summer dark, the same warm Virginia night full of crickets and the smell of grass. As though the story had folded back on itself and brought them both to the place where it had actually begun. He heard her step and turned. She had thought walking out here that she would speak first. She had a sense of what she wanted to say, or at least the beginning of it, the first sentence from which the rest would follow. She was a woman who worked better when she had assembled her argument before she presented it. But she looked at him, and the sentence dissolved, and what remained was simpler than an argument. "You said you wanted to find me after," she said. "I did." He turned fully toward her. "I have been standing here for 40 minutes trying to determine how to say this correctly. You don't strike me as a man who usually struggles with that." "I don't," he said, "which is how I know this is different." She waited. He looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen her clearly from the first moment, that had never once looked at her. The way her family looked at her, as a resource to be deployed or a piece of furniture to be arranged. And he said, "I have been watching you for 3 days move through an impossible situation with a clarity and a courage that I have not seen in anyone, man or woman, in my adult life." He paused. "I want to be honest with you about something. I told myself I was helping because of Calloway. Because of what he did to my estate 3 years ago. Because of justice and the Port Authority and the right reasons." He stopped. "Those things are true, but they are not all of it. And I have spent enough time being precise about other things to owe you precision about this one." She was very still. "I asked Thomas to seat you where you could see the room on the first evening, because I wanted to watch you work," he said. "I had read you once at a distance, and I wanted to be certain of what I had read. And I was." He looked at her directly. "Everything after that, the study, the documents, the plan, it was real work, and I meant all of it. But I was not entirely motivated by Justice Miss Caldwell. I was motivated by the fact that you were the most fully alive person in this house, and I could not stop paying attention to you." The summer night was very quiet around them. "Alexander," she said. "Yes. You are a man who says exactly what he means." "I try to be." "Then I will say exactly what I mean." She took a breath. "I have spent my entire life in rooms where I was invisible. Not because I hid, because people chose not to look. And I made my peace with that, or I told myself I had, because the alternative was wanting something I didn't believe I would ever be given." She held his gaze. 2 days ago, a man I had met once looked at me and saw what I was actually doing, and then asked for my help as though my help was the specific thing needed. Not Norris's help, not my father's. She paused. "Do you understand what that was worth to me?" "I think I'm beginning to," he said quietly. "It was worth more than I can tell you." She took one step toward him. "And I would like very much not to pretend that the past 3 days have been only about Calloway. Because they have not been. Not entirely." He looked at her for a moment, and she saw it again. The thing she had seen at the end of the gathering. The unguarded quality, the nervousness beneath the steadiness. And she found to her surprise that it moved her more than his certainty did. Because certainty was easy to perform. Nervousness was real. "I don't know what I'm offering you," he said. "I want to be honest about that too. I have not done this particular thing with any success. I am better at ledgers than people. I am better at problems than conversations." He paused. "I cannot promise you I'll always find the right words." "I don't need the right words," she said. "I need someone who looks." He stepped forward. "Then I can promise you that," he said, "without reservation, for as long as you'll allow it." She looked up at him. At this man who had spent 3 years building a careful case against injustice, and had used it in the end, not for revenge, but for the right purpose. Who had seen her in a corridor 2 nights ago, and made space for her at the center of something important. Who was standing in front of her now, being by his own admission imprecise because she mattered more than precision. "Alexander," she said. "Yes." "Stop explaining yourself." A pause. And then, for the first time in 3 days, he smiled. Not the controlled social expression she had seen him use in the gathering rooms, but a real one. Brief and warm, and slightly startled, the smile of a man who has been surprised into it. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took it, steady and deliberate the way he did everything. His hand was warm, and her hand in it felt for the first time in 3 days like it was not holding anything. They stood like that for a while on the terrace in the summer dark. The formal review opened 6 weeks later. The Port Authority, faced with documented evidence of coordinated misrepresentation across 6 years and 4 counties, launched an investigation that would take the better part of a year to complete. Richard Calloway retained 3 lawyers and contested every document with the focused energy of a man who understood that delay was its own kind of weapon. But the social landscape that had been his real architecture, the web of relationships, the carefully cultivated trust, the rooms full of people who had believed him, that was already broken, and it did not reassemble. The merchant families he had targeted or intended to target compared notes for the first time, which is what happens when a pattern is named publicly. Sutherland alone had 3 incidents of commercial interference he had attributed to bad luck that, now examined in the new light, looked entirely different. The Hargrove family began the process of contesting the land decisions from the previous spring. The Pemberton shipping contract was reviewed. These things moved slowly the way legal things move, but they moved. Calloway did not attend another Charlottesville gathering. This was noted. In the language of Virginia's merchant society in 1817, absence from the rooms where business was done was not retreat, it was erasure. He remained in his offices in Richmond and managed what he could manage from a distance, but the distance itself was the answer. Norbert, who had served as his instrument with the Ladies' Society and the Port Authority correspondence, quietly closed his law practice in Charlottesville by autumn. He did not announce this. He simply stopped being present, which was another kind of verdict. Price remained where he was in the careful, quiet life he had built and received through Alexander a formal letter of appreciation from the Port Authority commissioners for his cooperation with their review. He wrote back a single sentence. It was the right thing to do. He sent no other communication. He had accomplished what he set out to accomplish and had the sense to recognize when the work was finished. Lillian came back to herself slowly, the way people do after something has taken them apart. It was not linear. There were weeks where she was genuinely better, easier in her movements, quicker to laugh, the warmth that was native to her returning in recognizable flashes. And there were weeks where she was quieter than usual, more careful reading faces in rooms, the way someone reads rooms when they have learned that warmth can be performed and trust can be architecture. Margaret did not try to rush this. She had learned in the 3 days at the Whitmore estate, in the sharp, compressed education of watching a system built on patience and patience alone, that some things take the time they take. What she did was stay present. She had dinners with Lillian, took walks with her when the weather allowed, let her talk when she wanted to and sit in silence when she needed that instead. This was not a sacrifice. It was simply what care looked like when it was not performed for an audience. Their mother adjusted slowly, the way their mother adjusted to everything through the refraction of social reality. When the Ladies' Society began to speak differently about the Caldwell family, with a specific respect, a recalibrated attention, Catherine Caldwell recalibrated accordingly. She was not a malicious woman. She was a woman who had used the available maps and now found herself with better ones. She never directly acknowledged what Margaret had done, but she stopped introducing her as "my elder daughter" in the particular tone that had always carried a slight apology in it. She began instead to say, "my daughter Margaret," with a small particular emphasis that was new and that Margaret chose to accept as the nearest thing available to what should have been said years ago. It was not everything. It was something. She was learning at 27 that something and everything were not the same, and that something was often what the real world actually offered, and that you could honor it without pretending it was more than it was. J.T. Edmund Caldwell made her a partner in the company in October. He did not make a speech about it. He set the papers on the table in the parlor one morning with a cup of coffee and said, "I've spoken with the attorneys. It's formal as of the 1st of the month. You'll have full decision-making authority on negotiations and contracts." He paused. "You've had the ability for years. Now you'll have the standing." She looked at the papers. She had imagined this moment in the abstract many times. Had imagined that it would feel like vindication or triumph, or the satisfying arrival of something long overdue. She had imagined it would feel large. It felt quiet, clean. The feeling of a thing arriving exactly when it was supposed to, even if supposed to had taken too long. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said gruffly. "I should have done it years ago. We both know it." She picked up the coffee cup, took a sip. "Yes," she said simply. "We do." Alexander came to Charlottesville in November, when the summer heat had finally released its hold, and the mornings carried the first real edge of autumn. He came to see her, not on business, though they had corresponded about business because the review had opened practical conversations between the Whitmore estate interests and the Caldwell Company about a freight arrangement that made sense for both of them. But he came to see her, and they both understood the distinction and did not pretend otherwise. He took her walking along the river road in the pale autumn morning, and they talked about the review, about the freight arrangement, about a book she had read, and a problem he was working through with the estate accounts. They talked the way they had worked together in the study directly without the social lubrication of performance, saying the actual things rather than the appropriate ones. After a while he said, "I've been thinking about a proposal." She looked at him. Her heart, without asking her permission, did something quick and simple. "The freight arrangement," she said. "No." He said it with the slight smile she had begun to watch for the real one, brief and warm. "Not the freight arrangement." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "I am not going to do this badly," he said, after spending 2 months finding the right words for it. so I am going to say it plainly. He turned to face her. I want to build something with you. Not a business arrangement, though I expect we would do that well also. I mean a life. A life where you are not managing consequences for other people but building something that is specifically and entirely yours. He paused. I would like to be part of that. If you will have me. She looked at him. At the autumn light on his face. At the steadiness that was not coldness, but its opposite. The rare, costly steadiness of a man who had decided she was worth being honest with all the way down without reservation. She thought of the letter in black wax. You are not the one they think is guilty, but you will be the one who pays. She had paid, and paid, and paid in the quiet currency of years and invisibility and work that no one credited. She had carried the wrong daughter's weight for so long, she had nearly stopped noticing it was wrong. She was done carrying what was not hers. Yes, she said. He reached out and took both her hands this time. She looked down at them, her hands in his, the river moving somewhere nearby, the autumn morning cold and clean and entirely real. I have one condition, she said. Name it? I keep the partnership, she said. The company, my work. I am not trading one room I was confined to for a nicer one. Margaret. He looked at her with those clear gray eyes. I would not want you any other way. A woman who can dismantle Richard Calloway in front of half of Charlottesville society? The real smile came again, fuller this time. I would not dream of confining her to any room at all. She laughed. A real one, sudden and unguarded, the laugh of a woman who has been holding herself together for a very long time and has finally in this moment, on this road, in this autumn morning, found something worth releasing into. She was not the wrong daughter. She had never been the wrong daughter. She had been the one they chose not to see. Not because she was invisible, but because seeing her clearly would have required them to want something different than what they had already decided they wanted. It was easier to look past her. It was easier to hand her the weight and turn toward the light. But she had seen herself, clearly, consistently in the quiet rooms where no one was watching. She had known what she was capable of long before anyone else did, and she had carried that knowledge the way she carried everything, without complaint, without performance, without demanding that the world rearrange itself to acknowledge her. The world had rearranged itself anyway, not because she had demanded it, because she had walked into a room with the truth in her hands and spoken clearly, and the truth had done what truth does when it is given air and light and someone willing to stand behind it. Margaret Caldwell, partner negotiator. The woman who had dismantled a system built in the dark and brought it into the light of a summer gathering stood on a river road in November, with both her hands held and her work intact, and her name finally permanently correctly understood. She had not been waiting to be chosen. She had been waiting for the world to catch up to what she already knew she was, and on that autumn morning, at last it had.